The first thing I do, I order more books than I should have. I mean, I joke very often. It's like the chopaholic instinct that people laugh about when they see it in movies. For me, I have literally walked out to buy one book that's worth $8, and I've left one store, went to the other, went to a third, and then ordered some books off Amazon and spent $120 in that meanwhile. I buy books in bulk, and I buy them on instinct. And the general idea is the more books around me, the better it is. I may not read any of them. I might read all of them. I might read some of them. It does not matter. I just like to be surrounded by books. There is no selection process per se. It's very instinctive. I feel like this book's going to be good. I buy it. Books is something, I've been in America 3 years. I've never bought a piece of cloth. Like I've never bought a piece of pants. I've bought none of that ever since I've been here in America. I'm still wearing the clothes. This is like 4 or 5 years old. I'm not fond of it. I would just rather spend that money buying books. And I waste so much money buying books. It just hang around. But here is the purpose. I want them around me because they remind me of things that I've read or can read upon. They remind me of the different dimensions that exist in our reality. So if I have Robert Trivers's Folly of Fools, a book that I've read for like 40 minutes to an hour since I've bought it, I haven't had the time to read that book or the interest to read that book. I now understand that there is an evolutionary basis. Just because this book is near my bed, I'm reminded that there's an evolutionary basis of deception that eventually leads to how we think about intelligence, how we think about human behavior from that one single point engine, deception. That's Robert Trivers's thesis. Now I know what he has to say, and then I can use that model, the scaffolding of the idea, selective pressures, right? Natural selection, all those little things, and the other rhymes and reasons that he uses, and export that from his book and import it to all the other ideas that I have. Nassim Taleb, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about Nassim Taleb, has a very interesting opener to his book Black Swan, where he talks about Umberto Eco, a very famous Italian novelist, and somebody goes to Eco and they walk into his room and they see all these books and they're like, Umberto, have you read all these books? And Umberto laughs. He's like, these books are not to be read. They're to be kept. And this is what Taleb calls Umberto Eco's anti-library. And I read this very early on. Since I decided, I was like, okay, I need to have an anti-library. And the general idea is that knowledge is not an ornament. That knowledge is not supposed to be something that shines and lusters off of you. That's not the intent. If you're acquiring knowledge to signal competence, hey, listen, I got it. I know what I'm doing. Then you're doing it wrong. Then you're not doing it for the right reasons. Umberto Eco, for that matter, or at least I buy those books for research. To be reminded. It's like it's the reason why people buy paintings. To be reminded of a particular state of mind. That's the reason. That's why I create an anti-library. That's why I have books from such a wide variety, and I keep them in sight. The first thing was I order more books. The second thing is I order them on instinct. The third thing was that I keep them around me, which is the Umberto Eco's anti-library concept. The fourth thing, as soon as I've bought my books, is that I listen to them on YouTube and podcasts. I will go over a summary so that I know what I'm playing with. Only the basic pieces. It's like I put a chessboard down and I set the pieces, and that's all I'm doing. Because the pieces are the author's dictate. So I set the pieces. That's all I'm doing. And then I decide that I'm never going to finish the book. I barely ever finish a book anymore. I read parts of it. I read the chapters that I want to read. I read chapters that I go to the chapters straight that I want to read. And that's all I read. Because what I'm going for, and I will re-emphasize this point as we go forward, is not what is said in the book. I am not looking for the ornamentation of that knowledge upon me, that luster of what I've learned upon me. What I'm looking for, is what I'm curious about. How did the global financial recession of 2008 happen? So when I'm picking up Arguing with Zombies, a book by Paul Krugman, I go straight to that chapter. I want to learn that. I want to know what he has to say about that. I'm not looking to ornament myself with, oh, I read that entire book. I read that. But that's not what I'm going for. When I hit a disagreement and I make notes, I was sharpening a pencil earlier after years today, and I was like, huh, this still exists, huh? I make notes, especially where I disagree. And when I disagree, I don't walk over the disagreement. I close the book, I let myself simmer. I see why the disagreement exists, and I see what the synthesis, the superposition of this disagreement is. How can I combine these ideas to make sense? I spend time with those books, right? I then also, once the disagreement is resolved, either I'm right or they're right, or some version of both of us are right, right? Eventually, what I do with most books that I read is that I create a bridging logic to my reality. So a good example is, again, I read Paul Krugman in 2008 Financial Crises. I understand how he's thinking. I see, now 2020, this is what's going to happen. A recession looks likely. What would Paul Krugman say? That's interesting. So that's what I do. I create a bridging logic into my immediate reality. Say this was not 2020 and coronavirus was not here and recessions is not what we were looking for, but I still read that book. I'd be like, okay, these are the pointers I must be looking out for in the future to spot a recession. So I take that abstract idea, something made out of words and symbols only and sounds only, mental representations in my head, and then I convert it into a more tangible real phenomena that I can understand, that I can apply. And that creates for a perfect bridge to learning. Then you no longer have to ask the question, how do I retain all the things that I read? You don't have to retain them. You have to convert them, make them applicable, make them your tools. You have all this wood and steel and iron and gum and glue and all these little things. You create a tool out of them and you keep it in your toolbox to be used at a later date or to be used continuously, depending on what that concept is. Right? Then there is something very interesting that I do that I had no idea that a lot of people don't. Like, I genuinely did not until I was speaking to a few friends and they were like, you're weird, bro. You do this. This is so weird. So what I do is I read half, sometimes even less than half. So for instance, what I'll do is I'll pick up, this is a book that I have next to me. The Predictioner's Game is a book by Bruce Bueno de Mesquita. He's a very famous political game theory analyst. I take that book, I read half of it, I figure out how this guy is talking, how he's thinking. Right? And then I try to imagine how he would finish the book. And then I let it simmer. I sit down with it. I just let it said about unconscious processing of ideas. There is a conscious part of you. You are aware of processing it. There is an unconscious part of you that's doing its job without you knowing it. And this becomes very, very obvious in psychotherapy. So, in fact, psychoanalytical therapy, more so, where what you essentially do is you just say something and you go back home and your mind's just playing with it in the back of your head and doing its job. And so this is what I do with books. I'd finish them halfway, I'd keep them and let my unconscious mind do it. Then, before I'm about to pick the book up again, I will do the conscious simmering of it. I'll be like, okay, what exactly did my unconscious mind do? Okay, nice, interesting, right. Oh wait, that's where it's wrong. I can fix that. Okay. And then I try to read the book, spot where I was wrong in my prediction, where I was wrong in anticipating what this guy might say. Right? And then I just see how I can create a superposition between those differences. I evaluate, I disagree with myself. I'm like, okay, this is blah, blah, blah. Okay, this might be right, this might be wrong. And you don't have to finish a book entirely for that. You can finish the book a fourth, you can finish a book 3/4, and then it depends on where you're at with your skill level. When it comes to reasoning, when it comes to logically anticipating, when it comes to predicting. And you finish the book, maybe you finish all of the book, leave the last 50 pages. And then you're like, okay, let me see how this would finish in my head. Or if you're very apt at it, you just start with the first 50 pages, you close the book and you see how apt am I. And then I go back reading it. The general idea is I'm not insecure about missing the nooks and crannies in the book. I'm not insecure about, one, finding out that I'm wrong, two, finding out that I did not read a page. Because those words are not wealth to me. They're not coins and currency to me. It's food for me. So I just want enough to just feel full. I don't want all of it. That's how I read. That's my fundamental process of reading. My intent is to acquire the writer's voice in my head. So I can create a copy, a dummy, place it in my head, And then the next time I'm in that situation, I can think like that writer. Or if I forget entirely how to think like them, I can pick the book up because it's next to my bed. Because I have all these books around me. And I'm like, okay, that's how he thinks. Okay, right. A lot of times I found people reading stuff, intermediary stuff, things that are building up to an eventual claim. The claim might be novel, but the build up is known. But people still read the known stuff. And I'm like, you can skip through that. Just turn the pages, scan them. Okay, this I understand, move forward. And again, there is a context dependence in the sense like, what's your skill level? Why are you reading it? Blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, you don't have to stick to reading every word of the book. It's just not compulsory. But we are taught to read that way, and we read that way all our lives. Another thing that you can do if you're scanning pages is that you read the first 3 words and the last 3 words of a line, your mind will construct what is in the middle. It does not work all the time depending on how dense this reading is and how, like, how much substance is being communicated per word. If it's looser, imagine Joe Rogan's podcast, right? You can just tune off for a while, come back, and things are still happening. You're like, okay, I catch hold of it. That's not dense. But Eric Weinstein's podcast, super dense. If you miss something, you have to. Slavoj Žižek's speech, dense. You have to go back, right? So depending on how dense it is, you can pretty much do first, last. Okay, I get it. Move forward. Right. Then I read multiple books at once. I will read 2 or more books at once, and I will let them talk to each other in my head. Okay, this is what Krugman's saying about the financial crisis, and this is what De Mesquita is saying about how political game theory works. And Robert Trivers spoke about deception, and the financial crisis was deception. And the way we resolved it was also very deceptive, wasn't truly honest. Okay, how is that coming together? How is the game theory being applied to deception here in the financial scene, and how is it causing the economic crisis? That's how I let these ideas talk to me in my head. I let them have a conversation. And that is where the superpositions are being created. An atmosphere of synthesis, where ideas are connected, where balance is struck. There is a professor I had, his name's David Kitte, right? And I've been trying to get him on the podcast forever, and hopefully I will. But he has a famous speech from Black Rock City, from Burning Man, from a TEDx at Burning Man, where he talks about how much, ? And he says it's such a boring question to ask how much, but it's such an important question to ask how much. He says it's so important because most things exist in the gray area between the blacks and the whites. It's very important when we establish differences between us to ask how much. How much conservative are you? How much liberal are you? Right? How much of so-and-so exists? How much of so-and-so exists? And that's essentially what you're trying to do at all. You have to ask yourself how much. Is it an 80%? Is it a 70%? What is the other 30%? So I let these ideas talk to me in my head. I talk about these ideas with myself. So this process of me talking about how I synthesize, this is me talking about my ideas of reading. I talk about this with myself, not just on my podcast and my content stuff, but also with my friends. I will explain it to them. First principle, starting from first principle, ground up, basic, bottom up, absolutely bottom up. And the whole function that fulfills is it makes the idea clearer to me. Until speaking is not the process of expressing what you know. Speaking is the process of actually finding out what you know. How much in detail you know that. When you speak, you take this mesh of concepts, mental states, mental representations in the back of your head, and you funnel them through a bottleneck of symbols that make sense to everybody. So speaking and writing, articulation, is not a process of saying what you know, is a process of establishing what you truly know. And so when I try and talk my ideas out, when I try and explain people those ideas, sometimes force, people don't like it sometimes when I'm going about that, but the general ideas, I become clearer with them. And I talk about these ideas with me in my head too. I will let them debate in my head non-stop, because I hate being right all the time. There has to be something wrong. How is it that there is nothing wrong with me? It has to be the case. It's only obvious. Right? So that's something also I do. I'm very whimsical and non-judgmental with my reading process. I'm very, very whimsical. I do as I please. There is no constraints and restraints. I don't judge myself for reading the way I read, ever, for whatever book I read. The attempt is to discover what I cannot store. The attempt is to discover, I wrote this line, the attempt is to discover what I cannot store all I could, and then use that discovery on an everyday level. The attempt is to understand all the pieces and then use them, funnel them inwards. Right? Ideas are not ideas. Ideas are not ideas. They're not just self-existing, isolated ideas. Acha, theek hai. We understand, say, how classical mechanics, Newtonian mechanics, right? The three laws of Newton: equal and opposite force, no friction will go on forever, blah, 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 blah. That's an idea that you can use to circumvent or physical phenomena, at least most of physical phenomena. But does that same principle apply somewhere else? Does thinking about it in the same way apply somewhere else? That is a process of extrapolation. And that's what I'm letting do. I'm interacting with ideas completely. I'm using them as tools, not just to solve this problem, but all the problems it can solve. Every idea in some sense becomes a Swiss knife like that.